I'd say Chris Farley and Danny DeVito, Chris Farley and David Spade is probably the funniest group, I think. Though I wonder how much of that's Chris Farley.
Really? Of all the pairings you would put together, like if you were making a movie, you'd be like, let's get Spade and Farley.
Yeah,
really?
Comedic pairings.
No.
There's definitely.
Well,
Farrell and Wahlberg are much funnier, for instance.
I would say, yeah.
I can't stand Farrell nowadays.
But the other guys, such a good movie. Hey, welcome back to Even More Mashed Up. We are the pop culture podcast where two professors talk about all things pop culture. I'm Alan.
And I'm Patrick. And hey, Alan, do you want to tell people what we're talking about today?
Nope.
Well, don't you think that's kind of rude to not let the audience know what we're talking about?
Nope.
I don't know. I don't know. Aren't you worried that we're going to alienate our listeners by not letting them know which movie we're talking about today?
Nope.
I can't believe that once again you bring nothing to the show.
Nope.
That's all I got.
Okay. I think it's time to probably let that one die.
Yeah. It was an idea that sounded really good on paper, but I am no Laurel nor Hardy or Abbott.
Who
Costello,
doesn't like vaudeville era comedy?
Yeah, well, you pitched it as like Who's On First, and I thought that sounds really great, Patrick.
Yeah, I did not have time.
But it's not.
Really, I did not have time to really kind of throw that together. So
no.
Who's on base? How old is Who's on Base?
It's Who's On First.
Oh, good
Who's
Lord.
on first?
Here we go.
So, but yes, if you couldn't figure out from that brilliant exchange between myself and Alan, today we're talking about the latest Jordan Peele movie. Nope. Yep. No, we are.
Right. That's what I meant. I said nope.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna kill this.
So you're ready to get started, right, Patrick?
Yep.
See, there we go. So
thank you.
Maybe we should start with the question Rich was asking before we started,
so,
and then I've got something I want to go to for Patrick.
So this happened with a couple of films, not a ton, but I've noticed, and I don't know if it's on purpose or if it's like, creatively someone else in production does it, but like I found that some trailers, especially this one, seem to almost lie about what the movie's about. In this case, like when I watch a trailer, especially with the sort of the kind of scares and the unnatural stuff that they showed in the trailer, like the woman with her face, badly damaged, with some of the reactions of the characters, it felt to me almost that the film was going to be this sort of like they were like plagues, visiting the town or something. The one shot of
like something
Jupiter.
biblical.
Yeah, because that one shot of Jupiter, Jupe, when he has the horse in the glass box, the way they show in the trailer, it's like some, it shows out of nowhere, and it's like this weird thing, like, is this crazy, cowboy with a horse in a box, terror, just sort of out there looking menacing, like, it's just unnatural thing of like, what could it be? And it's, completely different context. And so,
for me, go ahead, Patrick.
Go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say, I complain so much more about the other end of the spectrum of the trailer that gives away kind of the entire movie, and you see all the plot beats along the way in the trailer. I like a good trailer like this that kind of leaves me guessing, and in many ways, Rich, it left me guessing in ways that I'm going to lead with a question for Patrick that probably should not have come to my mind, but the juxtaposition between the trailer and what showed up got me thinking. So anyway, Patrick, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I'm like you, Alan. I mean, I from what, particularly with the first trailer, which was a lot of like just different sort of cuts from the film.
Yeah.
Like I just sort of like, it just looked weird. And so I had no idea beyond like, this just looks like a weird kind of a movie.
Would it be fair to say though that it is a weird movie?
It is weird, yeah. But I mean,
but I had no like some weird parts.
I couldn't really tell from the first trailer, exactly what was going on in the film. So I kind of like what you said, Alan. Like it was enough to intrigue me, but didn't really give anything away.
Right.
And then there was a second trailer I saw that, because the first trailer doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a second one that showed some of the exchanges between Otis and M. I was like, oh, so this, elements of this has sort of like a comedy vibe to it. So I was kind of intrigued with that. So. The trailer. I mean, the trailer didn't really. It didn't really set up any expectations beyond kind of like trying to figure out like how, like you said, the woman who kind of looks like a zombie.
Yeah. Again, and I liked the movie portrayed in the trailer. I was intrigued by it. I think, just a bit more disappointed that like all of those elements had very mundane, semi-mundane.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things I liked, because when she shows up that was one of the things I thought when watching the film, and she shows up in the crowd at the I forget what the name of the event
Family
is.
Day or family
whatever.
Something.
Yeah, and I immediately thought, like, oh, I liked that, because they set us to expect like there's going to be creepy zombie people everywhere, and then it's just the girl from the television show that got mauled by the chimp. So I was like, I thought that was a nice bit of misdirection on their part.
I think whenever somebody like Jordan Peele is obviously a really, really smart person.
Yep.
And I think, so I don't mind it when he's doing it, because I feel like there's a purpose to the misdirection in ways as well. Mm-hmm. Which in a way leads me to the question I wanted to ask Patrick, because the thing I most remembered from the trailer was sort of the cowboy ranch kind of vibe of the film. Like, I imagined that we were entering into something that was like a Western. And so the film opens very chaotically, not unlike Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? Where it's now the bloody monkey. Like, it's a pretty striking moment. But then we go from there to kind of what I remember from the trailer. Like, we go to the ranch, and we see the frontier.
Oh, I know. Yep.
But we very quickly realize that the frontier is fake, right? That it's not like a John Wayne kind of Western, that Otis Sr. and Otis Jr., like, they're running a family business where they're training horses literally for Hollywood. And so this got me thinking about you, Patrick. And I spent a lot of time when I was watching the movie focused on the idea of the frontier in this movie, because I know you've spent a lot of time thinking and writing about the frontier. So the setting is the frontier, or it seems to be, right? And the frontier is this mythical American place. It's symbolic of opportunity and individualism. It's kind of seen as this crucible of the American character. If you listen to like somebody like Frederick Jackson Turner, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the frontier is what made Americans Americans.
Right. In generally positive ways, right? I think others have like increasingly twisted it to thinking about the negative implications of the frontier.
Oh yeah, Turner and your kind of originators of the frontier myth, kind of, Turner's the big one. Teddy Roosevelt kind of feeds into that quite a bit. Yep. Mm-hmm. That they see, the frontier experience is what sort of molded us as individuals and as a country into what America is. And they see that as entirely positive. Now they do that by largely pretending that, there was nobody else there. And particularly for Turner, I mean, that's one of the big differences between Roosevelt and Turner. Roosevelt, what made Americans Americans, and what made in particular American men was the conflict against the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples. Like it's that savage conflict that Roosevelt emphasizes. For Turner, there's that element of it, but he very much downplays it because he wants to cast the people that settled the frontier as your farmers. And he kind of talks about different waves, and one of the waves was, of course, the violent wave that came through and, wiped out and relocated indigenous peoples. But he focuses on the waves after that are kind of the civilizing waves.
Civilizing and
kind
quotes.
Of farmers. But again, going back to that original idea, the frontier has always been fake.
Right. And so to me, that was kind of the question I wanted to wrestle with a little bit, right? Is if the trailer suggests like we're going back to the frontier, and the frontier has, I would call them, like as you described them, kind of romantic notions. Even the way Roosevelt thought about violence, I would argue, was a kind of a romanticized way of thinking about violence and what it meant for us. And that, plays forward into John Wayne films, like these, it's a romance with the West that lasts for a long time and erases indigenous people. And in many ways erases Mexicans and erases African Americans. But so the movie starts.
Everyone that was
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh,
so
well, we mentioned, to point out, it erases everybody that was here, before us.
Right.
Before America.
Right. And that continued to coexist beside white Americans, right?
Yep.
So the movie starts by making you think it's this frontiersy kind of thing, but then immediately zooms out to show that it's actually Hollywood, like that it's all fakery and kind of movie magic, which got me thinking like about the ways in which the film is maybe trying to challenge these fundamental ideas of where being an American comes from. Am I reading too much into it? I guess that's my question, because you're the frontier expert, Patrick.
Yeah, that's not the direction that I went with.
Totally fair.
The frontier. I mean, because obviously, the frontier imagery is there in the film. For me, it's really bound. It's hard for me to separate from what I think the movie is doing with Hollywood in general, and within kind of this, there's obviously this overarching theme in the film of spectacle and I would say exploitation.
Right, absolutely.
And, the frontier is another example of that kind of exploitation.
It's very Rooseveltian. Absolutely.
But I think you've reached the point, and for me, the thing that really kind of drives the point home about, as you said, kind of the frontier being fake and that, it only being myth is, of course, Jupiter's Claim, which takes all of those elements of the frontier and turns them into an amusement park. Like the frontier only exists in that form. It's all, or that's the clearest form of it. It's all fakery. It's all
howdy doody costumes and whatnot.
Yeah. There's the guy as M's walking through that's like, oh, we got gold here, and come get some gold. It's all that kind of, and again, it's not even mimicking a real experience of the frontier. It's mimicking the Hollywood version of the frontier. So it's very much not to get too theoretical and Baudrillard here, but it's several levels of simulation beyond the real. And so the film, I think, in terms of because one of the things I always say about Turner is that he declares in 1893 the frontier as the grand experience that shaped Americans, that it's what made us who we are. But also, he says the frontier no longer exists, and so
the 1890 census said, right, that the frontier was
frontier's
gone.
Closed. And so, sort of the unspoken question at the end of Turner's essay, "The Significance of the Frontier in American History," is we've been defined as a people. If you accept his premise, we've been defined as a people and a country by the frontier experience. What happens to us once that's gone? And there's lots of works that kind of, I think, deal with and the idea of the frontier as kind of a dead end. And
but that's also where Jupiter's Claim is really interesting, right? Because we don't give up the frontier.
That's where I was going. Is
we just simulate it.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to. Is that in this film, the frontier is very much that dead end, and all there is a kind of recycling and simulation, and in that sense kind of an exploitation of this thing that no longer exists and really only ever existed in myth.
Right. Not unlike something like Westworld, right? Which is playing with similar kinds of themes. And the why is it that we still as Americans feel so compelled to try to return to that frontier, or at least what we imagine to have been?
Yeah, or try to find new frontiers. There's I mean, obviously, JFK and Reagan, all both used kind of frontier imagery. One for the Cold War, one for space race, but sort of talking about the frontier, trying to find new frontiers. And then in the 21st century, you've got the internet and cyberspace as the new frontier, and Star Trek as the space as the final frontier. Like we're all another thing that runs throughout kind of 20th century literature is the effort to kind of reimagine frontiers and find new ones, because, you know, if that's what defined us, we need to find something else, which obviously gets into issues of imperialism and you know, cultural
For sure.
appropriation and whatnot. But yeah, I think in this film, it's not the most obvious theme of the film.
Right.
But
it
I think
fits
this is
with
a
that
film
idea of spectacle.
that ties kind of some of the. I think again, it's kind of like what we talked about with Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is a film that thematically, for me, works on any number of levels. Like that idea of spectacle and exploitation. I think you know, Peele is kind of exploring that and critiquing it in multiple ways. One of those ways is, I would say, via kind of the frontier aspects of the film. Yeah.
Well, just, you know, there's a reason why Frederick Jackson Turner became kind of a rock star in 1893. You know, and historians really never become rock stars, it turns out. It's not because he did good history. I think it's because he wrote something that connected to Americans in a really profound way. That I mean, we're still wrestling with.
Yeah, well, and Turner, I mean,
later.
Turner's frontier thesis became how American history was taught for like the next 50 plus years. So, like, you know, again, kind of his kind of rock star status. I mean, he kind of shapes, you know, going into the first half of the 20th century, how we like to think about ourselves as a people and our history. So, like, there's no underestimating, you know, the power of that frontier thesis, which still holds us today. You still see politicians and other types
100%.
of using that frontier imagery, because it does, you know, the frontier, the cowboy is one of, if not the quintessential American, you know, at least for men, figure.
Absolutely.
And all of those things still, and again, it's important to know, I mean, kind of thinking about, and there's another place where you can think about, you know, how the frontier ties into kind of the critique of Hollywood in Nope.
Yeah, and so maybe
is the way in which blacks are absented from both.
Yeah, maybe this is a good place to kind of spin forward from the frontier to, you were talking about spectacle and exploitation, and maybe thinking about other ways in which the film is playing with that kind of theme.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about the way in which African Americans are erased from Hollywood?
I mean, I can talk about it in terms of the film. If you want to talk about it more historically, then I mean,
I think in terms of the film, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's one of the things I find really interesting about the film, because you've and again, it focuses on, you know, Em and Otis and their family, you know, the way in which that the film kind of positions them as descendants of, you know, the first person to ever appear in the first, you know, film.
Right.
For what you have, the black jockey riding the horse.
Right.
And so, you know, their family is, assuming you accept that's just not part of their hustle.
Right.
But, you know, their family is positioned as sort of at the origin point of Hollywood. And when we get to the present day of the film, we see them very much marginalized within it. You know, for me, it's kind of, you know, Otis Jr., I should say, is doing what he can to kind of keep the family business going, but he's, you know, it's not going well. He's having to sell off the horses. He's very much sort of on the margins. And then the counterpoint to that is Em, who is, as I said before, like, she's just got to constantly hustle,
right,
to make a living. You know, there's that line about, I think it's Jupe, that says something about, you know, that he's among Hollywood royalty, or someone refers to them as Hollywood royalty because of their connection to the jockey figure, and yet they're not part of the present day Hollywood royalty. They're on the margins of it. You know, something they, as a family, and blacks more generally, have been a part of. They are marginalized within it.
Their position in the industry is completely tenuous. Right, like on the set, they are at the absolute bottom of the food chain in terms of, and you know, and the set we see, they're immediately kind of fired.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that kind of erasure is definitely worth thinking about in this film.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's probably one of the clearest, I think, critiques in the film is kind of that the way in which blacks are marginalized within Hollywood.
And from the work of a historian like Donald Bogle, that whatever roles existed for African Americans early in the film industry were very quickly sort of run out of the film industry and replaced largely by blackface actors. Yeah. So there is this complete kind of erasure. I wonder, how do you think Jupe fits into that, right? Because he's also, a person of color. He's an Asian American actor. Do you see the film making the same kinds of arguments about his erasure as it is Otis and M?
Yeah, Jupe, I don't know. Jupe as a figure in this film, there's just some really interesting, I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around him.
Yeah.
Because there's so much about him that also, I think, as we find out in the film, seems to stem from trauma.
That's the word I've got in my notes for Jupe that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, because so much of it's tied into Gordy and that whole situation we see in the beginning of the film, and it keeps coming back to so much of what. But it also never tells you, there's still that whole gap of time from when he was 10 or something till now that we don't know anything about, so we don't know. You assume he's not in any other shows. You assume he wasn't cast in other stuff because he never talks about it.
Yeah, I mean, in that he makes an interesting parallel to the real life of experience of the actor that played Waymond in Everything Everywhere All at Once, who had great success as a child star and then is only now able to come back. There's ways in that I'm just thinking this right now that Jupe kind of fits that mold without the comeback. This is the best Jupe can do. Right. Is running sort of Jupiter's Claim and kind of trading on both that and because that's the other thing. I mean, clearly Jupe is one of the figures in the film that is most responsible for the exploitation and spectacle.
Right.
And yet there's the trauma, there's the fact that in the way that I kind of read the film, he learns kind of the completely wrong lesson from the scene with Gordy.
100%,
when he does the fist bump, he kind of assumes that, he still has, Gordy may have just, maimed and or killed a whole bunch of people, but he's got some sort of special connection with them.
Yeah, he can tame them. He can.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is there's so much language about taming in this film.
Yeah.
Which was another thing that made me think of the frontier, because that was another way that the film plays on that frontier imagery of kind of that idea of taming things. So yeah, Jupe he's a very complicated.
I almost kind of wish the movie was more about him, almost, because it almost seems a bit more interesting, kind of interesting about what, to see that process from the incident till Jupiter claim, to see what his life was like.
Yeah, well, I think it works in some of the same ways. For me, it works in some of the same. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
To me, that's the erasure, though, that Patrick kind of intimated. And I think, I don't care for child actors, and that fist bump scene he has with the chimp is, it's disturbing. But to me, another way in which kind of Jupe gets erased is that trauma gets funneled through mainstream American culture into humor. Right? Jupe can't talk about that moment with M and Otis in any kind of meaningful way. They're like, what really happened? He's like, oh, if you really want to know, you ought to go watch, SNL, because Catan really nailed it. And then he shows them
I love that.
Then he showed them the Mad magazine, both of which are turning what was obviously, an incredibly violent and traumatic moment into this kind of insensitive humor. But it's a humor that serves to erase Jupe, right? It's a humor that erases his trauma. It's a way for us to kind of process it in a way that doesn't mean anything, but makes his lived experience insignificant in understanding it, which to me, Rich, is why it makes total sense that the movie is we're not going to learn anything else about this guy. Because the point is, the industry and pop culture erases Jupe and Asian Americans just the same way that it's erased, the Haywood family from its history.
Yeah, because, I mean, you can even say that, like, the only reason he even got the role, I don't know what his role was called, on Gordy, but, like, the only reason he got it was because he was almost, like, the sort of token person to be on that show back in the day because he was a cute kid, like, they might have cast him as an Asian kid simply because it's like, oh, and he'll be, this sort of unique part, not that he was a good actor or that they generally wanted, that person on there.
Well, back then, right? Back then,
I say back then, especially, yeah,
that would have been kind of the multicultural solution to inequality and representation.
Quote, token actor,
as long as we bring,
we're good.
As long as we bring, Jupe on the show, we've got it covered. And anything that happens to him, or anything that doesn't happen to him in the aftermath of the Gordy massacre, like we're not concerned with any of that. Like our only concern is with kind of that tokenized representation. And so in that way, it's a way in which people of color can get erased even when they're still seen.
Yeah.
Like if we don't see the Haywoods.
They're just there to fill a quota.
Right. We do see Jupe, but we don't really see Jupe, because if you really saw Jupe, you wouldn't find the Mad Magazine funny. If you really saw Jupe, you sure as hell wouldn't write a Saturday Night Live sketch about, a chimpanzee losing its mind and killing and or maiming who knows how many people before it's shot and put down.
Yeah.
Which makes the inclusion of the female actress that got maimed by Jupe, or not by Jupe, by Gordy.
Yes.
It kind of makes the inclusion of her in the scene, because she's not mentioned as even being still alive up until that point.
Right.
Yeah. I assumed she was dead.
Yeah, and then she just shows up. But it's interesting to kind of think about the way in which that she wears that trauma very visibly.
Right.
Which counters the way in which the Jupe's is invisible. That his trauma is not visible, and that's another way that it's kind of erased, and a moment that again just makes kind of the kind of jarring suddenness of her presence. I think is in some ways can be interpreted as kind of making the point that she manifests her trauma visually, whereas Jupe sort of disguises his.
Right, which kind of feeds back into the conversation we had about the model minority when we talked about everything everywhere all at once. Like, Jupe seems like the model minority, right? Went through incredible trauma early in his life, but has kind of built a business and what seems to be economic success around him, right? He can buy the Haywood's horses. They're the ones that are struggling economically,
he can offer money for the ranch.
He's doing quite well economically, which is, from an outsider's perspective, meant to show or meant to signify to us, we don't need to worry about him or Asian Americans because they're all doing fine. Which again,
except obviously
another kind
of
erasure.
Yeah, and again, something that the film very much undercuts, because obviously we find out
for sure. Yes,
he's buying the horses just to keep feeding them to the creature, and that's why he offers to buy the ranch.
Because it's also, God forbid, if he doesn't want the Haywoods to know what's happened to the horses.
Yeah, well, because that's the thing. Like Otis Jr. brings up, I want to buy back some of the horses, and that's when Jupe immediately says, "Oh, well, the deal for me to buy the ranch is still." He completely deflects from it because obviously the horses can't be bought back because they've all been eaten.
So I will say, it's been 6 months. You'd think that Otis would check in on one of the horses once in a while.
I just feel like the creature's getting hungrier too, but that's like a side point. It's like he's getting it's too used to eating. But maybe Jupe is a good way, as we're talking about the horses, to kind of then shift to the next topic that you guys brought up, which was the theme of kind of taming wild animals, or I would define it more broadly, kind of taming the frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking like, or even just thinking you have power over it, sort of. But I think taming the frontier is makes more sense from the stuff you were talking about before.
I think it's entirely, Rich, a case of Peele trying to point out our hubris. Like the idea, the idea that we can tame the frontier, which is, again, I know that I'm reading this film too narrowly, but I blame Peele's trailer for making me think this way. You know, that theme that we could tame the frontier, that we could take that frontier experience and make it what we want it to be, is just not true. That the frontier has left us with at least as many negative consequences as it has positive consequences, that we can't tame it, and that our pop culture can't tame it, which I guess Jupe discovers when he gets eaten, right?
Yeah, well, I think for me, what and this, like I said, this is where I see kind of, the frontier being one facet of what the film is doing. Because the other thing that I think the film does, I mean, there's obviously the whole thing about, as we said, exploitation of the frontier. There's obviously the whole thing of exploitation and spectacle with Hollywood. Right. But there's also, for me, a almost quasi-environmental theme in that it's not just about the frontier. It's about our kind of arrogance in thinking that we can tame and control nature. Absolutely. Because that's what happens with Gordy. That's what happens with the creature. These are things not of the human world. They're part of the animal world, for lack of a better term, and kind of the way in which the film kind of shows humans as repeatedly not respecting and outright disrespecting the natural. Because you see it in the commercial scene. I mean, the reason that Otis gets fired is because nobody's listening to him or M about the safety precautions, and they're not, they're not respecting the horse. I think Otis even says something about that, about kind of having to respect, the horse. And so there's kind of this, for me, it struck more of a, like I said, an environmental theme in terms of we kind of assume in our, as you said, Alan, our hubris, our arrogance, that we can control nature, which is exactly what Jupe is doing. He thinks because he's feeding this creature, that, he's able to control it. And clearly, in the end, he's not. Right.
Gordy's going to lose his shit at some point, and it's just how it's going to be.
And the creature loses its shit.
Right. What makes it scarier for me, because you can look at that, creature and be like, all right, well, that's just make believe. Or you can look at a chimpanzee and be like, I'm not going to be around chimps a lot in my life. Like, I'm probably going to be okay. But one of the trailers that ran before I watched Nope was the upcoming film on Robert Oppenheimer and the creation of the atomic bomb.
Yep, that was mine too.
And kind of like you watch that trailer and then you watch a movie that kind of one of the main themes is human beings have this incredible overconfidence in the way in which we can tame and control nature, that we can use nature for our own purposes. And just watching the Oppenheimer clip before this kind of really makes you sit up on your seat and go, holy crap, like this is like just what we see in Nope, with literally a huge monstrous alien that eats a few people, is barely scratching the surface of what we actually think we can do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we as humans are addicted to the idea of controlling this, because we can't. It's not even something as arrogant as we just keep wanting to poke. We can't not ask the question. Well, what if I do this? What if I do that? Can I get it to do this? It's like we don't have, as a species, the ability to stop and let something be. There's always going to be some subset that's like, well, what if you did that? And we always look back on the positives of we invented electricity, we invented this because we kept asking, what if? But then we also made the atom bomb. We made biological weapons. We made things that killed a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it's the Jurassic Park lesson, just because we because we can do it doesn't mean we should, or whatever or whatever the Ian Malcolm says, you were so busy trying to figure out how you could do it that you didn't figure out if you should. Right, but that actually raises a question I have for you, Alan.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the places where the film got a little bit thorny for me.
Okay.
Is the extent to which the film implicates Otis Jr. and M in that critique. Because they're running the horse farm, right? Which is kind of, it is part of. They're at least complicit with the exploitation there. Right. They're the ones that piss off the creature. by feeding it the thing it doesn't like. Yeah, that's what gets the creature.
Well, it
enraged.
is their greed, right?
Well, wait. What do you mean? You mean the horse statue?
The horse statue and the flag. That's
and the
what.
flags,
that's what
right,
makes
that
the creature angry.
Yeah.
Prior to that, the creature's just hanging out for its weekly meal from Jupe. But after that, the creature is
hungrier
becomes
and more aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, and so and it was one of the things that I found really odd, particularly given the end of the film, because there's this great heroic moment where, both M and Otis Jr. survive, and Otis Jr. shows up on the horse.
Right.
But their entire plan is to take the photo that they have of the creature and exploit it for their financial gain.
But
like,
Patrick, sorry, Rich, just real quickly. That's what I found. I found so interesting. There was a moment where they're sitting around a table after, like, the crusty director has agreed to come, and they're figuring out how they're going to shoot it. Mm-hmm. And Angel, right, the guy from the electronics store,
the Fry's, yes, which is an actual Fry's store, by the way, that apparently was abandoned.
I got that. Yeah, I got that reference.
That's pretty cool. So he asks towards the end of the film, as they're sitting around the table, I can't remember the exact quote, but he says, "We're doing this for quote unquote good, right?"
Yeah, yeah.
He says,
this'll save
I know
people.
there's going to be,
there's
going to be some money. I know there's going to be some fame. He says, but it's really important to him that they're doing it for some higher purpose too. He's right. Like, we're going to save some lives, right? This isn't just about that poor TMZ guy who shows up, who doesn't care if he's dying, just wants to get filmed, right? Like, he's in it.
I thought that was it was a little funny how crazy he was about that. It was almost a little.
Well, I think it's a satire, right? It was society,
it was so
right?
extreme. It was like,
all that matters to us is fame and money. And so, but to get back to Angel real quickly, right? Angel is saying, yeah. Go ahead, Patrick.
I was gonna say, is it wrong though that when he went flying off the bike, I laughed out loud?
No.
Oh, I thought it was hilarious.
I think he wants you to laugh.
I thought it was really convenient that he had an e-bike and not a regular bike.
But just real quickly to get back to Angel.
Yeah.
He's pointing something out, Patrick, that I think Peele is saying about Otis and M pretty directly in a couple of ways. You've pointed out a couple more indirect, but Angel kind of asks the three of them sitting with him at the table, like, this is for some higher calling, right? We're not just doing it for the money and the fame. And it seems like none of the others had actually thought about that idea to this point.
Yeah.
Like, they all react with a moment.
Feel,
right. It hangs
the
there just silently for a moment. And I think Peele wants audience members to feel that silence and to realize we have been rooting for Otis and M as they pursue self-interested, and as you point out, Patrick, exploitative, ends and means, like what do they want? They want the Oprah shot. Like, they want the cash that's going to come from them exploiting this creature. And it might be that Otis understands the creature better than Jupe, but does that really make for a better exploitation? I mean, I think that's a moral question that's pretty easy for me to answer, at least. And
it's just for me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
I liked the, I was going to say, I liked the thorniness, Patrick. I liked that Otis and M weren't just pure heroes in this film, but they are implicated in problems as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the heroic ending, particularly of Otis on the horse, is maybe just a little bit too much, maybe kind of grading against that a little bit too much, because we're clearly supposed to.
Yeah, but it was kind of confusing.
Can I argue against that for a minute, Patrick?
Sure.
Now, again, I know I've read this movie much too narrowly from the beginning. I fault Peele for this. But if you accept my argument that he's trying to demonstrate, like, the fakery of, the falsity of that frontier image and that frontier experience, having the hero show up on horseback at the end it could be read as kind of an over-the-top satire as well. That you're getting this ending, but we all know, because we learned at the very beginning of the film, that these Hollywood endings are all faked. What did the Red Hot Chili Peppers saying? Like, space might be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement, right? Like, that scene of him on the horse. Like, this film is such a meditation on cinema. It's such a reflection on how do we make films and what does filmmaking mean and what do we use filmmaking for, that I think by the time you get to the end, for me at least, that like seeing the lone cowboy hero sitting on a horse is only meant to like make me ask a bunch of questions about what seems like, I agree with you, way too pat, romantic, and happy an ending.
Yeah, I think my worry is, and again, it's similar to what my concern with Everything Everywhere All at Once, and the way that ended, is that you can also walk away from this film not asking those questions and just kind of be like, oh, the good guys won, yeah, it's the plucky underdog story that Otis and M and Angel are going to be successful. Like you can, and so just like in with Everything Everywhere All at Once, I wish there was something, because I agree with you, that's certainly there to be pondered, but I think the ending leaves both possibilities kind of open in a way that I wish there was something kind of undercutting that heroic moment just a little bit more at the end.
Well, in some ways, I hear what you're talking about, Patrick, is the debate that Vicky and I have long had about The Wolf of Wall Street, which I see as a film that's critiquing kind of Wall Street capitalist culture, especially in the 80s and the 90s, right? But Vicky always argued, but most people who went to see the film weren't paying attention to the critique. They were just seeing like how much fun it was to work in like a cocaine-fueled, misogynistic,
Rich
stock
Rich
brokerage,
looks like it's awesome.
Right, exactly. And so, like in some ways, I think to appreciate Peele's film, you have to want to think about film.
Right.
That if you go in thinking that it's just like a monster movie, that I agree with you that you run the risk at the end of the film of audiences kind of being like, oh, happy ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, I'll admit I was kind of confused during the film as to what the themes were. Like, I got some of the exploitation and, like, the Hollywood stuff, but, like, especially near the end when the cinematographer shows up, like, and again, I felt like everyone's acting like all heroic, and it's like, all you're doing is taking a photo of it. I assumed there'd be, like, an after-credit scene where it shows, like, the military seeing the photo or something, so that it implied, now they know the existence of these creatures or something.
Yeah, I guess.
To give it more purpose. I'm not saying it just should have been.
Right.
But I agree with you that I agree with what you're saying, that, they're also exploiting the creature, they're caught up in this. I guess it never felt strong enough.
Yeah.
That it all just felt a little... I almost kind of wish the monster was in the movie. Like, I feel like there are a lot of these other elements that you were talking about that you see before the monster becomes significant that gets almost taken away from with the monster.
Yeah.
Because now we have to ask questions about the monster and, like, all the physicalities of that, of, like, is this the only one? Is it,
Right.
But introducing it pulls away from, I think, all that stuff.
Yeah, but like your point about like wanting a post-credit scene of like the government showing up or whatever. One of the things that I thought was really striking about this movie that I want to at least mention, I know we only got so much time, so I want to at least, this seems like a logical place to throw it in, is that when all of this stuff starts going down, nobody ever stops to think, like, should we call the cops or the government, or should, we get Mulder and Scully on the phone or
you
whatever?
Think the government would have showed up already when 40 people disappear.
Right, but to me, it totally makes sense. Like, what would Biden do to make the situation better? What would Trump do to make the situation better? Even more so, if you're an African-American family trying to scratch out your own independence, like, why would you turn to authority to fix anything? So in a way, them not turning to authority made sense. But to Patrick's point, it also seems to leave them complicit in kind of capitalism in ways that makes the movie kind of thornier than your typical monster movie might be.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to think about. I hadn't thought about the idea of, the government / authority in the film until you just mentioned it, Alan. But it's something to think about how, is it saying something? Does that tie into the whole kind of spectacle and emptiness that there is no authority anymore? That it's all. I mean, maybe it's all just the morality of capitalism and thus, that's what really kind of controls things. That there's not a human authority.
Right, but Patrick, that's what we celebrate about the mythical frontier, right? Like part of what made us great, it was the absence of authority. Was that white frontiersmen moved into the frontier and like carved it out themselves, right? Like there
the wasn't of the frontier.
Yeah, that freedom of the frontier, and I think Peele's movie might push us to think about the way in which that freedom was never really free, at least not for everybody. And that, in fact, it was as capitalist as the frontier is presented in Nope is. We just pretend like it wasn't. We pretend like it was something different.
Yeah, well, and it's another thing to kind of think about in terms of another maybe sort of subtle critique, and maybe this sort of works with Otis Jr. and M, is, they're all complicit with those capitalist values of, sell whatever you can sell.
Right.
And so, what they can do, the only option they have is to try to take advantage of the system that they're, sort of wrapped up in anyways.
Right. Which makes them still complicit in a way. Like, it may not be a totally chosen complicity, but like it in that way, we're all complicit, right?
Yeah. Well, and in that way, there's no real morality in the world of the film. It's all sort of a morality of the market.
Almost as if capitalism, right, pretends that there is a morality in the market, right?
Yeah.
Like that supply and demand provides us with some kind of moral solution to human
even
relations.
The way the film makes us want to think that, Otis and M are good,
right?
But Jupe is bad.
Right.
But ultimately they're all doing, the same thing and in some ways for the same reasons. Jupe is just as we talked about, he's just as marginalized. His sort of hustle is not terribly different from M's hustle that we at least get a little bit of a hint at. I mean again, he's a thief and she's a thief. So that there's not a great deal of difference between them. Maybe even kind of the film in its own way gesturing towards the way we tend to turn minorities against each other, as opposed to, the systems that are exploiting them or marginalizing them.
Right. That you get so caught up in the system and you get so deprived in the system that you no longer see the system as the problem. Like because you're worried about putting food on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, that's a grim ending. Well, I guess it was a fairly grim film in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it was I found it an interesting film in terms of, like, it started off as kind of this mash of like sci-fi horror and kind of, a film like Signs in some ways where, there's the alien presence, but you're not really seeing it.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like.
And then it goes full bore into, like, just kind of a very kind of 1970s sci-fi Close Encounters kind of vibe at the end.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting mashup of kind of horror and science fiction, which I found interesting. One of the things I found interesting was the one moment that kind of freaked me out was the moment early on where Otis encounters the kids dressed up as aliens.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The way those kids move, totally uncanny.
Yeah, it was all that freaked me out. I was like, oh hell no, this is not.
I was honestly disappointed that was just a kid, because like that was such a great moment.
Yeah, I kind of enjoy the fact that the again in a film that's all about it, that the greatest kind of the most suspenseful kind of horror moment is a moment of complete fakery.
Right. Yes. Patrick,
that freaked me out.
Speaking of like horror and science fiction, for my fair foul, one of the things I brought was an article on Time that said, like, people don't agree what this movie is about or what this movie is. And we've talked about a lot of the different versions. Time said some people think it's a monster movie. We talked about that a little bit. Parable of the Power of Cinema. We've talked a lot about cinema and filmmaking. A critique of surveillance culture. We haven't talked about that a lot, but I think you could see it. Yeah. You could see it in there on different levels. The monster surveils us, but we're buying all the surveillance equipment. Black historical documentation we talked about, and capitalism we talked about. So it could be maybe that the film is all of those things. Like, what do you think? Do you think it's one of those things, some of those things, none of those things?
I would probably lean towards it's all of those things. That as we've just spent, what, an hour, close to almost an hour talking about all of these things that the film is doing.
Yeah.
I think that's the brilliance of Jordan Peele as a
Agreed.
filmmaker.
Yeah.
Is that, this is, again, this is, in comparison to his other, all three of his films have been successful, have been, critically and publicly acclaimed. I think this is the one that maybe seems to have not quite resonated with the public as much.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Particularly as Get Out.
Yeah. Can I drop a fair or foul in there?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you've got
because
one.
it's directly to the point you're making. So a guy named Mark Kermode, that's really his name, Mark Kermode, from The Guardian. I tried to find a more negative review because it was a film I really liked. So I wanted to kind of wrestle with somebody who didn't like it as much. And he says, it's an elliptical and sometimes frustratingly paced yarn about our habit of staring in stupefaction at danger, disaster, and trauma. He then goes on to conclude, it's a better movie to argue about than to watch. And we've just spent an hour kind of talking about it and arguing about it. Do you think that's
we haven't talked about the plot much at all?
Clearly that part of it is fair.
Yeah,
and again, I think that goes back towards some of the 70s science fiction vibes that it has, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind or 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like it's got some of that vibe where, it's a very smart film, but not one that's necessarily easily digestible. I think to his credit, Get Out was very, very easily digestible in terms of, what it was doing with horror, what it was doing thematically. That film was very, I think, clear in what it's doing. This film is very complex.
Right, because Get Out is much more focused, right? It has a particular theme that it wants to pursue, and there's so much more going on.
There is,
I also think that, because the other two films, and again, even with us, I've seen it, they're all quote unquote that monster element in it. There's horror elements and there's different, but I think especially with this one, once you bring in that monster, then it changes. You have to explain certain things, or people start asking too many questions about how did the monster work and stuff. To Get Out, it's just a group of people with this whole scientific process. It's much easier to explain away how no one knows about it or whatever. And with us, it's people in a bit of a remote area and stuff when it's happening. I think with this one, it's it's not. Again, I liked it was entertaining. I was entertained when I watched it, but afterward, I kind of left not caring too much about some of the main plot and much more about the specifics. Again with Jupe and how trauma was with him, and how those specific elements. I could have I don't care too much about the main plot of them getting the photo or whatever. It was more about what it meant than actually watching it.
Well, I guess for me this is one of the reasons I love movies. I mean, not that I don't love a good MCU kind of on the edge of your seat kind of action adventure, but this is a film that, I don't know, the further away I get from it and the more I hear y'all talking about it, the more interesting it kind of becomes to me, because I think there's a lot going on here. But I also read somewhere that Peele wrote this film as people were worried about the future of cinema, amidst the COVID pandemic, and how do you get people in seats and whatnot. Yeah. And some critics I think see this movie fairly in some ways as kind of an homage to some of the stuff you've talked about, Patrick, a classic 70s kind of sci-fi film, or in some ways a horror film or a supernatural film.
Yeah,
it's all
got kind of a mix of that.
Yeah, and it maybe it has. I think it would not be an unfair critique to say it might have so much packed into it that it can overwhelm a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean,
again,
there's a
think you
lot
could have-
going on in the film. I mean, it's just kind of thinking about the narrative of the film. You know, we make
Yeah.
multiple jump cuts back and forth to the Gordy scene.
Right.
There's the title cards with each of the horses' names on it.
Yeah.
Which you know sort of are clearly being used as some kind of structural device.
Yeah.
That there's it's a film with a lot of moving parts. And I think almost from the and it's a film, and it's a film that does not explain things to you. I think to the very beginning,
Absolutely.
when you get sort of this, you know, we see Otis Sr. get killed, and then there's the shot of the quarter or the nickel or whatever it was that's on the wall.
Yeah.
And the film doesn't spell it out in any way, but that's the nickel that killed him.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's
And it
something
even
that the
shows it
film
later.
leaves audiences, you know, it's not like Otis Jr. ever says, "Oh yeah, that's the nickel that killed my dad."
Right. No, there's a lot. Sorry, go
there's
ahead,
a lot of
Patrick.
stuff like that. I think that the film, the film maybe assumes the best of its audience, that it doesn't
Interesting.
need that stuff explained.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
The word that comes to my mind, Patrick, is the film, like, Peele trusts the audience. That this is a film that doesn't see itself as just kind of imposing some kind of moral lesson or some kind of thematic story or some kind of, you know, straightforward narrative on the audience. Like, it's a film and it's a filmmaker that trust audiences to enter into a conversation with it. And I don't think we get a lot of films like that. I'm really happy this podcast, like the last couple of weeks, we've done Everything, Everywhere, All at Once and Nope, both of which I think are films that you can enjoy maybe without thinking about too much, but the filmmakers really do, in fact, trust you to work things out and to wrestle with themes, you know. And Bobby always says he hates it when people say to them, you know, like, what does your film mean? You know, Bobby would argue it's not the filmmaker's job to tell you this is what it means. It's your job in conversation with the filmmaker to construct meaning of it.
Yeah. That's the same thing with literature as well. That's kind of the idea that
art
you
in
see
general.
that I mean, you know, it's Jim Phelan at Ohio State that talks about the feedback loop between the author and the reader, and that they exist in sort of this feedback loop that
Right.
you know, the author creates the text that's I don't know if these are his terms exactly, but it's a blueprint for meaning making, but the reader interacts with that in their own way, and the meaning that the reader makes isn't necessarily going to be the meaning that the author intended or had in mind or whatnot. Hopefully I'm doing Jim justice there. But yeah, I think well, and I think in many ways it's another way. Maybe it's getting a little too meta, but you know, for a film that is very critical of the Hollywood industry, it makes a certain amount of sense that we're not getting a film or a film that's like those typically churned out by the Hollywood industry.
That would be super meta if it was a film that was just like. And so again, that's why the cowboy on the horse at the end, I think, is such a profoundly interesting kind of way to end it. I hear all of your complaints, like how much do we trust audiences, I guess, becomes part of the question, especially as like there's a full frontal attack on education in this country.
Yeah, maybe Peele trusts audiences more than I do.
Yeah, I think that seems clear.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think because I mean I can ask a million questions about the creature, you know, and about why things happened, and that's really the only element that I think I have issue with, in that it doesn't seem to. The creature kept pulling me out of paying attention to the film and like noticing those little elements and stuff.
I wouldn't say the creature did that for me, Rich, except at the one point where the creature comes and eats Jupe and everybody who's at the show. Because by that time it's established that we can see Jupe's arena from the Haywood Ranch. We know that they know there's something up there. We know that they've got cameras. We know they're watching. We know they're paying attention. And somehow they all get gobbled up, and Otis Jr. shows up like an hour later, completely oblivious to it.
Also, because why did that happen? Is it the implied that they all looked at the whole don't look a predator in the eye thing, I think is taken to such a sort of silly degree.
Well, I think
where it's like you can summon the creature by looking in its eye.
Well, it's not just the not looking in the eye. Keep in mind that we see a whole bunch of times that if you are in an enclosure, it doesn't eat you.
Yeah.
And the horse figures out, I'm not coming out of this glass box. Like, I know what's going to happen.
It's
You're
beautiful.
The idiots that are out in the open air. The
but
horse
you would think
is like,
the box
the
would
horse
be like
is
not
smarter,
over
right?
or something.
yeah, the horse actually figures out. He's like, no, like you've been feeding my, my family to this thing. You morons. I'm not coming out of this glass box, and that's why they get eaten. Like the creature's been summoned for food, and
but
the
even
horse isn't
Jupe
there to be
says the
eaten.
creature is early.
I've got a horse brain, and I'm not going to fall
so
for
why
it.
was the creature
because it's
early?
early because the thing's been, the thing was fed something that it didn't want, and it's grumpy.
They've been antagonizing it. Yeah, it's like you wake up early because you ate too much pork before you went to bed.
And
I don't know, does that happen if you're not
it's
vegan?
not just the one horse that's there to eat. It sees a whole bunch of snackables.
Yeah,
But
it's like it's like the Golden
if we're
Corral
attributing-
is all of a sudden
But
laid out.
if we're
It's an
attributing
all-you-can-eat
animal
buffet.
like qualities to it, like again, the assumption is that again, and we never get anything about it because how would you talk about it? But like, the assumption is that this creature existed beforehand and was attracted to whoever they are, Jupiter's claim, whatnot, because of Jupe, because he saw defeated, but it existed before those 6 months. And the reason no one ever saw it was because it always attacked at night, it hid in the clouds, and now it just sort of stops and just it comes out in the day all the time.
Well, I think that's the line that Otis says something about. He refers to it as a predator. And,
Yeah, but a predator is also smart.
Well, but the humans have been messing with a predator. And when you piss off a predator, that generally doesn't end well for the prey.
And you're messing with the environment. It comes back to that hubris, right? That we can control the environment, and if massive global warming is happening, like what's really going to happen to affect us? Is it going to really?
Well, that's one of the things I like about the design of the creature, because in the beginning, like when we first see it, it looks like a flying saucer. It looks like something that we think we understand, even though we call it an unidentified flying object, as if that tells us anything.
Right.
It basically says, this is a thing, we don't know what it is, it's in the air. But then it turns into something that is completely,
right.
foreign and alien.
Yeah,
and
I don't know why it does that.
Yeah, but to Rich's point, like I don't want to know more about the creature. I don't think.
Oh no, but
in the context of this film,
and again, I don't either. Like, I don't need to have everything explained to me. The problem is that like those become sort of plot points. Again, I would have been happy if there wasn't a creature. Like, I think you could have talked about if there were just like weird stuff happening, like aliens, like something, and it still led into all that look into the exploitation and stuff with Jupe and whatnot. I would have been fine because so much of the movie near the end, especially, hinges on what the creature and the monster is doing. The more questions pop up because it's become such more of a focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think
stayed mysterious, if it had stayed more mysterious, almost like Signs or something, then I would have been okay asking less questions because it wouldn't have been like sort of the movie wouldn't look at it so much, and then I have to start asking questions like, why does it look like that shape? Why does it become a flower thing and do the little flashing pulse thing at the end, but then doesn't eat OJ? But then eats it was perfectly fine eating people normally, and then it has to do the whole, like, I don't know, ribbon dance thing at the end. And it just, that happens. I have to be like, well, why? I've been asking questions about the film the entire time I'm looking into it.
I guess.
We see from the very beginning, the creature spits out anything that's not organic. That's the keys and all of that.
No. What I mean is at the end, it becomes like this very elegant looking like flower thing with like a green box that like flat pulses.
It's a cross between
apart,
a jellyfish and a Venus flytrap. It's a jelly trap.
Right, but why?
Have you been waiting an hour to drop that, Patrick?
I've been waiting a while. Yes, it's a jelly trap.
You had the jelly trap. Had jelly trap in your back
but see,
pocket,
that's the,
and you're
think
like, I'm going to use a jelly trap.
That speaks even more to the point that Alan brought up about the hubris. Like, it's not just that we're going to try to exploit and control things that are of our world. You know, we're going to try to exploit and control and think we can exploit and control things that are completely foreign to the world and we don't know anything about. Like this creature, you know, we don't know anything about this creature. Like
we should not do that, right? We should not do that.
Well, then
right?
in that case, I almost would want Em and OJ to have lost, or like she just runs away because like they do control and win against it.
But I think the film at the end is kind of gesturing towards a happy ending, but only in kind of what you would expect in a fakey Hollywood Western.
Yeah.
You know, like that's where it is. And I don't know, in a way, Rich, maybe Jordan Peele would be really good, would feel really happy that you're so perturbed by wanting to understand kind of the functioning of the creature. And he's like, but dude, the point is we can't. Like we want to pretend that we can, and these, you know, they kind of cobbled together the best they could, but in the end, they still don't understand the creature. We don't.
I mean, I guess. I mean, I would be happy to not ask these questions in my head. You know, I'd be happy to not want to.
I hear you.
But throughout the film, you know, you are sort of rewarded for asking these questions. Like you would say back at the beginning when Jupe is like buying horses and he gets nervous when he starts asking about, you know, buying them back and stuff. And then you realize later it's like you're rewarded for remembering that and it kind of clicking, you know.
Yeah, I suppose.
And like you said, the horse was smart enough to realize don't go out of the box because the creature is only powerful enough to do that or whatever. Like, you know, I don't think the film gets to say, hey, think about some stuff, but not about other stuff.
Well, the best part of the film might very well be that if we're right and Peele trusts viewers more than, you know, Patrick thinks he should, this would be a good place upon which to kind of stick a landing for the show, is that like we don't necessarily agree about it. And I think Peele might be okay with that.